from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Unemployment hits a 4-year high, but the White House predicts an economic boom. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as the government drops monthly jobs data today for November, reinforcing the Fed's decision to cut rates this month. And we're going to talk about the White House reaction when we sit down with Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall. And as Vice President J.D. Vance heads to Pennsylvania to talk affordability, following in the footsteps of President Trump, we'll consider the political impact with our panel and more when we talk with Republican Congressman Jason Smith, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, with us on affordability, health care, and government funding. All after a look at Wall Street. Let's get up to date on the Tuesday trade with Charlie Pellet. He's at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Jobs Tuesday, the trade, lower Joe Mathieu. Right now, we are at the lows of the session with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're all declining, looking at a 50-point drop right now on the S&P 500 index, down by about 0.7%. We're at 67.65. Dow Industrials just above 48,000, 48,006, lower now by 0.9%. NASDAQ is down 116, drop there of 0.5%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index have been up for much of the morning, turning lower as well, down 0.3%. The 10-year 4.15%, with the 2-year 3.47%. Gold is down $2.50 the ounce to $43.02, a drop there of just under 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.5%. WTI now at $55.38 a barrel, and Brent crude just above 59 right now. Brent, of course, the global benchmark. It is down 2.5%. Bitcoin up 1%, 87,070 on Bitcoin. Signs that the job market is sluggish, but not rapidly deteriorating, saw traders refraining from boosting bets on near-term Fed rate cuts, sending stocks lower and bonds wavered. Pfizer is forecasting little to no sales growth next year as the drug maker undertakes an effort to refresh its pipeline of hit drugs with a series of pricey acquisitions. PFE on the ticker, and right now Pfizer shares, they're down by 5%. Recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red, lows of the day. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
Well, tough session so far. Charlie, thank you so much. We'll get back to Charlie Pellet for more in about 20 minutes' time as we keep tabs on the markets for you every day here. Live from Washington, welcome to the early edition of Balance of Power on this Tuesday. I'm Joe Mathieu. The 16th of December, as we count the ways here, and coming up, an important conversation a short time from now with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. 4 legislative days left this year to figure out some fix to health care premiums that are set to skyrocket following the end of this month. Lawmakers are done work this week, however, and so we've got a close watch on this for you with the remaining work left to be done here in this congressional year, if you will. Job growth, though, is the headline this morning, or lack thereof. It depends on what your expectation was. We did see an increase in payrolls, 64,000 in November, and that topped some forecasts. It also fell shy of some whisper numbers. But the unemployment rate marched higher to a 4-year high, 4.6%. When we consider the impact of higher participation, this is the way the White House is framing the bump in unemployment. And we heard earlier from the acting chief of the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, Pierre Yared. Listen to what he told Bloomberg.
If you look at the unemployment rate, it's true that the unemployment rate did tick up. That uptick, though, is statistically insignificant. And if you dig into the numbers and look at what caused it to go up, it's entirely driven by re-entry into the labor force. And that's consistent with the fact that when you look at the labor force participation rate, that labor force participation rate also went up.
Participation up as people get off the couch and look for a job. And it might have to do with rising prices. It might have to do with any number of reasons why we're seeing participation increase here. The fact of the matter is, though, the number of people who are long-term unemployed, out of work for 27 weeks or more, went to the highest levels we've seen since the end of COVID, since the end of 2021. Unemployment for Black Americans jumping to 8.3%, the highest as well since, yes, 2021. But an aggressive take on the jobs report from the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, who points to an economic boom in the new year. And that's where we start with Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, who's made her way over from the White House to talk to us about this. The reaction that we're hearing from the White House here as Vice President J.D. Vance heads to Pennsylvania to talk about affordability is striking. It's, I guess, wait till next year.
Right, exactly. Have this patience when it comes to the administration's policies. But as we just outlined, we heard from the administration earlier when it comes to their defense of that uptick in the unemployment rate. Yared saying to Bloomberg Television earlier that it's statistically insignificant. And then you're really seeing these other advisors, including the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, in this statement that was put out. The NEC Director Kevin Hassett, of course, in the running to be Fed chair, in an interview earlier today, focusing on the private sector. Private payrolls increased by $69,000 in November. And the administration had also been trying to hearken any shift when it comes to consumer sentiment on the economy, link that with the government shutdown. We should say that the BLS wasn't able to quantify the impact of the government shutdown in these numbers. So that wasn't really something that the White House could pull on when it does come to the response in these numbers. But you're exactly right. The administration has really been threading this needle when it comes to being on the defense over the cost of living. J.D. Vance out on the campaign trail, hitting Pennsylvania again, following in the footsteps of President Trump last week. But, Joe, this is heightening for the White House because we know that one affordability issue is really reaching a pitch, and that's on Capitol Hill over the future of health care, as it appears very likely that we are going to go over that so-called Obamacare cliff. As we heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today, the House isn't going to tack on an extension to those expiring Affordable Care Act tax subsidies.
It's really interesting how these two have such a different approach. President Trump calls it a Democrat hoax. J.D. Vance is asking for patience. We should note the S&P 500 down to its low of the session here. We're down almost 1% right now, which has turned into a pretty ugly session, having actually seen some green shoots this morning. You know, when this jobs report came out, futures turned positive, seemed to reinforce the idea of lower interest rates, but we, I guess, decided that bad news can, in fact, be bad news. I need to ask you about an important breaker. This just went red on the terminal thanks to the reporting of Tyler Kendall. You know this more than us, Tyler, because it's your story. The U.S. threatening to retaliate against EU companies over a digital tax. What can you tell us?
Right. So the top U.S. trade negotiator, Jameson Greer, threatening retaliation against the European Union in response to the bloc's efforts to regulate American tech companies. And these are regulations governing digital commerce, and they've hit some of the biggest U.S. tech giants. We're talking about Amazon, Meta, Google, companies like this. Now, if we have his post, in his post, the USTR is writing that, quote, if the EU and EU member states insist on continuing to restrict, limit, and deter the competitiveness of U.S. service providers through what he's calling discriminatory means, the U.S. will have no choice but to begin to use every tool at its disposal. Now, he goes on to talk about this idea that we could see fees or restrictions. You'll recall back in February, actually, President Trump had issued this memorandum that instructed the USTR to look into what they are calling unfair trade practices related to digital services taxes. In fact, they renewed a Section 301 investigation into them. And DSTs have really been at the center of many tariff negotiations, particularly with the EU, though when that agreement was reached to lower tariffs on the trading bloc down to 15%, we didn't really see much progress when it came to digital trade. So it does appear that the U.S. is now re-upping its threats. It wants to see this ultimately addressed, and this could really heighten tensions between the U.S. and the EU, because as we've been covering right now, many of these countries are working together to try to push forward what could be a fragile proposal to end the war in Ukraine.
Then again, after that defense strategy review that we saw come out of the White House last week, Tyler, this is coming against the backdrop of deteriorating relations with Europe.
Right, and we should say that we did have the EU's trade chief on Bloomberg Television yesterday who actually defended the bloc's policies when it does come to digital trade. He told us, quote, that the EU will protect our tech sovereignty. So really expect this to keep coming up, because it doesn't really seem like either side is budging. We're going to, of course, watch what the U.S. does when it comes to EU-based service providers, potential companies being named Accenture, Spotify, these other private sector companies that the U.S. has alleged has had unfettered market access to the U.S. for the past few years. And the U.S. is arguing they want to see that for our big tech companies.
Really interesting, Tyler. Great job. And you can read a lot more about this breaking story on the terminal or online. It just went red with Tyler Kendall reporting from Washington. I'm Joe Mathieu. Thanks for being with us here on Balance of Power in Washington, D.C. as we keep the bead here on the story of affordability. The White House certainly is As we just mentioned, J.D. Vance being dispatched to the same state that Donald Trump visited, even the same area of the same state in Pennsylvania. The president was there last week as we went through this idea of affordability as a Democrat con job. He even said that Susie Wiles told him not to say that, put him out on the road to make the case. J.D. Vance tends to have a more empathetic ear, and we'll be listening closely to the way he frames this today on his travel outside of the bubble. We spoke about the issue earlier on Bloomberg TV and radio with none other than Ken Griffin. He spoke to the issue of inflation in Paris. Listen.
Just 12 months ago, President Trump and the Republicans swept into office on the issue of inflation. And the Democrats have rebranded the problem of inflation as the issue of affordability. And they are now well poised to return to control of the House. And there's even discussion of them retaking the Senate on the back of how the affordability issue strikes a chord with the American public.
Enter J.D. Vance with a rallying cry on making America affordable again. A week to the day after President Trump held the big rally there, remembering as well that this will be a very important stop on the road if J.D. Vance is, in fact, going to be the 2028 Republican nominee for president. It's where we start with our political panel today. Bloomberg politics contributor Jeanne Zaino is with us, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, alongside Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, the founder of Bluestack Strategies, who spent many years working in a former Speaker of the House's office. It's great to have both of you with us. Jeanne, we've been talking about this issue of affordability for so long that it goes back to another president here. Striking to hear from Ken Griffin, who described this exactly the same way President Trump does. We had the issue of inflation that got him into office, and Democrats created this idea. He says Democrats rebranded the problem as an issue of affordability. Is this just about semantics?
No, it's not. I mean, the reality is when you look at the polls and what people are saying, whether it's straight on polling or consumer sentiment, that data shows that people are very, very concerned about the cost of living, everything from healthcare to housing to electricity to energy. That's all real. And then you look at the numbers, just the jobs numbers out today. You look at inflation. It is the same now as it was in September, same now as it was when Joe Biden was in office. So, you look at all of these things and it remains a real problem. And you have J.D. Vance out on the stump, and he is saying Democrats complaining about affordability is like Charles Manson complaining about violent crime. He's supposed to be the more empathetic of the two. And he's saying, just wait, folks, things are going to get better. Except once again, you look at the bank rate, 1/3 of people saying the economy is going to get worse next year. So the messaging is out of sync, but the messaging is out of sync because it doesn't reflect how people are feeling or what the numbers on the economy show. And the White House is struggling in the same way the Biden White House was.
Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, Maura Gillespie, speaking to the jobs report this morning, saying workers' wages are rising, prices are falling, and I'm not sure which metric she's looking at there. Trillions of dollars in investments are pouring into our country. And importantly here, Maura, she says the American economy is primed to boom in 2026. What if it doesn't?
I mean, that's going to be replayed, I think, in every ad for the midterms, but every local election across 2026, and rightfully so, because if the Trump administration can't deliver on this golden age of America that they've promised, right now it seems to be only the Trump-only world. The Trump world is the people who are benefiting from the tariff policies and the striking deals with companies like NVIDIA and otherwise. Everyday Americans and largely the people who voted for Donald Trump, they have not been feeling that boom that they've been talking about. And so I do think there is a lot of pressure on the Trump administration to deliver, but it's also an opportunity for Republicans in Congress to separate themselves a little bit, because the tariff situation has been so hard for, I think, many Republicans in Congress, since it's really not a conservative principle or value or a type of policy that anyone who is a Republican would have been behind. And so they could take an opportunity here to separate themselves and look towards policies in Congress that can get the economy going.
How much is J.D. Vance going to be speaking for Donald Trump today, Jeanne, versus himself Everybody's looking at this Quinnipiac poll that shows Josh Shapiro beating Vance in a hypothetical head-to-head in Pennsylvania by 10 points. He's got to have that in the back of his mind today, right?
Oh, you better believe it. And that's what makes it so curious that they keep going back to Pennsylvania, where you have Josh Shapiro just sitting there with, his eye on 2028, just waiting to say something. And so they keep going back. J.D. Vance is certainly thinking about 2028. It's the top of his mind, just like it is for Josh Shapiro and so many of these other folks out here. And they are trying to have him sort of play cleanup as he follows Donald Trump down the line. But as Kamala Harris can tell any of us, it is hard when you've got to defend the actions of somebody else in office and you have your eye on running. And that's the position J.D. Vance is going to be in as he moves towards 2028. And we're already seeing this very disjointed message out of the White House. J.D. Vance saying that, it's a real crisis brought on by the Biden administration, and Donald Trump's calling it a hoax. Well, it can't be both. Either we've got an affordability problem or we don't. And what neither of them is doing is so perplexing to me, is getting themselves to Congress to deal with the biggest issue regarding, or one of the biggest issues regarding affordability, which is health care. The Republicans have basically thrown up their hands on health care. We heard that from Mike Johnson today. The only person that can move that is the president or the vice president. They're out in Pennsylvania saying either this is a hoax or, we feel your pain, but it'll get better. The messaging and the reality is all wrong for J.D. Vance, for Donald Trump and the White House.
Maura, if affordability really is President Trump's biggest problem right now, and he would tell you it's not, as he does on a regular basis, he would tell you what Caroline Leavitt said, that they've brought prices dramatically lower. And in some cases, he points to eggs and gas. That is, in fact, true. But could the Supreme Court be the best thing that happened to Donald Trump if it struck down the tariff regime and elevate this affordability crisis to something he could solve?
It would be the best thing for Republicans and the Republican Party. I think that, to Jeanne's point, talking about the messaging, that's been really all over the place. You can't say that the economy, or people who are feeling that the economy is not going well, that it's because of Joe Biden, and then in the same breath say that the economy is booming and things are going great. It can't be both things at the same time. And so which is it? And what are you doing about it? And so for Republicans, they're hoping the Supreme Court steps in and saves them. And I also think that Speaker Johnson is also looking at this healthcare subsidy situation and thinking, I'm not going to put my Republican conservatives on the line here, but the moderates who are going to vote for this, they can go over to Jeffries, and then we kind of can wipe our hands of it, at least here in the House. It's not a very strong strategy, but I think it's one that he's going to play out this week. And so, unfortunately, that doesn't address the issues. It doesn't address the affordability factor. But I think that, by and large, Republicans need to remind their constituents that they understand that affordability is not a hoax and that it is what got them elected, and that they are working towards a solution.
Where does J.D. Vance stand in the mainstream media right now, Jeanne? We've got 30 seconds left. Does he get coverage tonight, or does Trump need to be there for the cameras to show up?
Nobody gets as much coverage as Donald Trump. I think he will get coverage. I think it depends on what he says. He's already been blaming immigrants. So in addition to the Biden administration, it's immigrants are being blamed for high costs. So he might get some coverage for these outlandish claims.
Well, we're always listening. You know that. When it comes to policy, when it comes to the administration's take on the economy, we'll give it to you straight. Jeanne Zaino and Maura Gillespie, great conversation. Thanks to you both for our great panel. Congressman Jason Smith is on the way in next. We're also keeping tabs on what's happening in the House of Representatives today with a very important Republican conference meeting with the Speaker of the House. We discussed this earlier with Jonathan Tamari as we try to figure out exactly how leaders are going to fill up the next 4 days. That's going to be it here. As we told you, we've got 4 legislative days left to go, and there will likely be a vote to some extent on health care. It's not going to be a vote on extending Obamacare premium subsidies, which have been all the talk recently here. And of course, the debate surrounding them led to a government shutdown. No, the Speaker of the House has put forth a Republican plan that would take a very different approach here. We saw the legislation first on Friday, and now that we understand that Bloomberg is reporting that moderate lawmakers will not be voting on the Obamacare premium subsidies before the end of the year. Some thought that would be the case in the form of an amendment. And we're joined right now to talk about this and a lot more by the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Republican Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri. It's great to see you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Do you expect there will be a vote then on a standalone Republican plan before this week is over?
You know, what we have been working on for some time is how can we lower the cost of health care and how can we lower premiums for all Americans. That's 347 million Americans. When people talk about the premium tax credit subsidies, that is 7% of the entire population. But every American's facing high cost of health care. And what we are doing today in the Rules Committee and tomorrow on the floor are just different examples of healthcare policies and changes that we can do that will lower the cost and lower the premiums for all Americans, whether it's PBM reforms, creating more transparency, or whether it is codifying choice accounts to allow small businesses to give their employees health give their employees money so they can purchase their own healthcare option at tax-free.
I know that, of course, the bills that hit the floor are the purview of the majority, and when it comes down to it, the speaker. But we've seen some swing district Republicans bristle at this idea of not allowing a vote on the Obamacare extension amendment. Mike Lawler, your colleague from New York, called it idiotic, Mr. Chairman. Why not just allow both and see where the chips fall?
I'll just say that we all have different opinions, but what the Democrats have been pushing, in fact, there was a vote last Thursday in the United States Senate that failed 51-48, I believe is what it was, on a 3-year current extension. The waste, fraud, and abuse within the Obamacare exchanges just in the last 2 weeks was highlighted by the GAO report that said 59,000 dead people were being subsidized. One Social Security number had 127 different policies attached to it. And the GAO also attempted with fake identities and fake Social Security numbers to enroll in the program, and 100% of them were accepted and 90% were still being subsidized a year later this year. These reforms have to be addressed. You cannot just extend it. And you know, the worst statistic that people should be paying attention to, of the 24 million people on the exchanges, last year alone, nearly 12 million never even filed a medical claim. You cannot tell me that they didn't have a medical claim. They simply were automatically enrolled and didn't even know they have it. But guess what? Those insurance companies, they were still subsidized.
You know, of course, and I hear you, Congressman, and we've heard a lot of your Republican colleagues make these arguments. But what do you say when somebody calls from Missouri and you've got a constituent on the line and they say, how can you help me out? My premiums are going to double next month.
That's exactly the case. Is the person who would be calling me from Missouri would be someone on employer-sponsored health care. And everything the Democrats is talking about has nothing to do with lowering the cost of premiums for people who are on employee-sponsored health care. And that's 164 million Americans. All that they're talking about is the 24 million people on exchanges. We need to lower the cost of health care for every single American, not just the people on ACA.
Are you not hearing from people on Obamacare, Mr. Chairman, or am I misunderstanding you?
Look at my congressional district. We have roughly 800,000 people in it. We have less than 5% that are on Obamacare. And we're the 9th poorest congressional district out of 435. So it is a very, very small population. In fact, even the people on the exchanges, 99.7% of the people in my congressional district that are on the exchanges will have generous subsidies to help them with their payments.
You know, we just got word from the president, Mr. Chairman, and this is just breaking. I'll share it with you as I read it from Truth Social. I will be giving an address to the nation tomorrow night, live from the White House, 9 p.m. Eastern. I look forward to seeing you then. It's been a great year for our country, and the best is yet to come. So we've got a presidential address, primetime address tomorrow night. It's been a while. Chairman Smith, do you suspect that he'll provide some guidance when it comes to health care reform?
You know, I'm thankful that we have a president who, in fact, communicates with the general public on a nonstop basis. Having an address tomorrow is just another example for the president to talk and speak to the American public directly of the accomplishments that's been happening over the last 11 months of his presidency. And will he be announcing other new initiatives and new ideas? It wouldn't surprise me because this man's working all the time.
I know that there was another meeting this morning. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you were in this briefing with the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs about the president's policy, his strategy in the Caribbean. We understand from the Secretary of Defense that it will the footage of the double tap strike will never made public. Do you agree that that's a smart move? And have you received enough information to make a judgment here?
I have not been part of any of those briefings. We've been today, the last couple days, focused on the healthcare legislation that's moving off the House floor and working with that and meeting with members and colleagues to make sure that the votes are there. But I haven't been a part of any of those briefings or those discussions.
Understood. Do you then, because of your focus on the healthcare legislation, have a sense of when we will see a vote this week?
I think you'll see a vote tomorrow. On the healthcare items that we suggested today at 2:00. Right after this, in fact, I will be presenting before the House Rules Committee, and that is the first step before it goes to the floor.
The House of Representatives, I was reading, will set a non-COVID record for fewest roll call votes on record in this session. Of course, that was exacerbated by the longest government shutdown in history. I just wonder if Speaker Johnson deserves some criticism for this, and if you expect a more productive year ahead.
You know, President Trump shows us that we can always do more and work harder. If you look at just the Ways and Means Committee, which I'm chairman of and that we've been pushing through, this year we've passed 123 different pieces of legislation out of our committee. That beats the numbers of any prior Congress by far in recent history. So we've been working hard. We did deliver on the largest tax cut in U.S. history, the largest investment in border security in U.S. history, the most significant welfare reforms in U.S. history, all within the big, beautiful bill, which affected 103 different tax chapters.
Well, you know, we keep hearing very quietly, and I'm sure that you're reading and hearing the same stuff that I am, that if the discord continues in the House, Congressman, that we could have a funding problem again at the end of January. As chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, point us forward here. What's going to happen when we creep up on that deadline? I know that we won't have a full-blown budget with regular order, but will there be a plan to avert another shutdown?
I'll tell you, it's been very difficult cooperating with the Democrats. We've had bipartisan markups within our committee, and you're talking about bipartisan pieces of legislation. For example, we had 9 bills last week that it took 10 hours for 9 bipartisan bills. And if you counted up the votes, it was 347 yes votes and 19 no votes over 19 bills. So super bipartisan, but the obstruction has been real and the delay has been real. And so the negotiations within the government funding is a huge issue. And I hope that the Democrats have learned from their lesson that they're not going to shut down government like what they did last time. They shut down government last time, and they were very clear. They wanted to spend $1.5 trillion in new money, including providing health care for illegals.
It's good to have you back, Congressman Jason Smith. He's chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and we appreciate your insights, Mr. Chairman. As we get closer to voting, he said, as early as tomorrow, important news there for you here on Bloomberg TV and radio that you have not heard anywhere else yet. The chairman pointing us to tomorrow would be the 17th of December for a vote on a Republican-led health care plan, that same bill that was unveiled late Friday. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for joining us today on Balance of Power as we cover a lot of bases this hour. We're going to get to geopolitics coming up next in conversation with Jane Harman, who will join us from World Headquarters in New York. And as we track these markets heading lower, it's not just stocks. Oil is also sharply lower today. West Texas Intermediate slipping below $56 a barrel. Pretty amazing, down more than 2%. Mike McGlone will speak with us about that coming up as we also watch Bitcoin move today. That is one of the few things that we see rising, as a matter of fact, up about 2%. For the broad market, though, it has become a major loser. The S&P 500 is now down 42 points. The Dow's losing 360, and the NASDAQ is down 78 points. Sub 1% losses, but still pretty stubborn after we saw some green shoots this morning following the jobs report in hopes that that would help to reinforce the idea of lower interest rates. It does seem that the sellers are taking over here. We're going to get an update on the markets coming up from Charlie Pellet. We'll also talk, as I mentioned, with Mike McGlone about the commodities, Bitcoin and oil, all risk off today in New York. I'm Joe Mathieu in the nation's capital. We'll have much more ahead on Bloomberg. We just got breaking news from the White House. If you didn't hear us break this in our conversation with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the president has just scheduled a primetime national address. Writing on Truth Social, my fellow Americans, I will be giving an address to the nation tomorrow night, live from the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, 9 o'clock. Set your clocks. We'll, of course, be watching so you don't have to. I look forward to seeing you then, he says. It has been a great year for our country, and the best is yet to come. The president speaking in the throes of Hanukkah here with so many issues that he could touch upon, including the health care debate that we were just talking about with Congressman Jason Smith, the future of his economic agenda. Maybe does he announce a pick for Fed, James, we think, tomorrow night? Unclear what he might bring forward, if not some reassuring words for the holidays. He talks a lot about the price of gas these days. In fact, yesterday said it was $1.99 in a bunch of different places in the country, and we're having a little trouble finding those, but indeed, the gas prices have been lower. And as Charlie Pellet just said, we've got a 55 handle once again on crude. West Texas Intermediate. Yeah, look at that. 55.55, down a little more than 2%. Just like Mike McGlone said it was going to happen. He's a great American, and he's with us right now. Bloomberg Intelligence senior commodities strategist live from Miami. Mike, you said it was going to go down maybe to 40, as a matter of fact, and I'm wondering if you can remind us of the trends that we're seeing here, because this is supposed to be winter season. Isn't oil more expensive?
Yeah, it's nice to get a few right. Well, if you want to talk about winter season, natural gas has absolutely collapsed from where it was just 3 weeks ago. It was up 40% in the year. Now it's only 5%. Let's tilt over, like you started with crude oil. $55 a barrel, just made a new low for the year today. I think it's more likely to be towards 40 next year than above 70. That's just a trend of oversupply and superabundance. And the key thing to get it much lower, Joe, is just a little bit of what people would call a healthy correction in the stock market, which might have started.
What does oversupply and healthy abundance mean for drill baby drill in the new year?
Well, that's the significance. It's not just crude oil. It's natural gas. It's corn. It's soybeans. It's wheat. It's the whole space. And that's the timing of Mr. Trump's presidency. He came in at a perfect time to say these kind of things and have them happen, just because we had that big spike up to the peak in 2022 that brought in all the supply. It kicked in the technology and shifted over to EVs, and now they're heading lower. So Superabundance is just a great book I read, and I enjoy what the proponent of it shows that when you have humans like us who create more with less every day, we want to embrace that technology, but not the price. And the price continues to decline in crude oil, corn, soybeans, wheat, natural gas, and I don't know what stops it, other than lower prices.
Looking at the understood. AAA's got the national average at $2.90 right now, so we are decidedly below $3. Where's the president seeing $1.99 or lower? Is that real?
Well, they can see that in some places. I've heard anecdotal, but I think the national average price at $2.90 is going to head towards $2 by this time next year. And the key catalyst for that, Joe, is, we haven't had a down year for the S&P 500 total return. We've only had 2 since 2008. Maybe we're due for a little bit of that. And that's every single time that gas has got to above 4, it got to 5 a couple years ago. It's always bottomed there too. And I asked myself, what stops that? To me, it's accelerating. Now the U.S. is a net exporter of crude oil, liquid fuels, natural gas. We're just a net exporter of almost most of those commodities we really need, which means we're dependent on exports. So it's a good sign that prices will all go down. But it's also the classic example of post-inflation deflation. And the question is, how long can that stay away from things like the stock market? Because it certainly is hitting cryptocurrencies.
Boy, it sure is. And I guess I need to ask you about that. It is remarkable, by the way. I'm going to be talking to Jane Harman in just a moment, Mike McGlone, that all the saber rattling down around Venezuela is doing nothing to elevate the price of oil. But I guess that tells us a lot about Venezuela's contribution to your points earlier. What's Bitcoin doing? It's one of the only green things on the screen. Is this just a little bit of a bottom fishing here or something else going on?
The biggest rallies typically happen in bear markets, and Bitcoin and cryptos are clearly in a bear market. The Bloomberg Galaxy Crypto Index is now down about 20% in the year. It was up over 20%. That wasn't supposed to happen. Bitcoin is down about 6% in the year. It was up about 30% in the year. But it put in a key peak top that I think is going to resonate for a long time. So I think Bitcoin is going to head initially towards 50,000. I don't know what makes it go higher, but key thing is it's the leading indicator factor, Joe, that I really key think that's matter. I mean, it's the tip of the iceberg of risk assets, and it's heading downward. I think it's the de-risking that's probably hitting the stock market today that might continue into year end. So I'm really worried that this is all going to trickle down into the stock market as we head to year end. And by the way, the S&P 500 did drop about 5% in the last couple of weeks of 2024, but had a lot of good things to look forward to. Now everything it's looking forward to is rolling over, particularly crypto.
Just wondering when Santa Claus is going to show up. Aren't we running out of days here? Mike, it's good to see you. Come back again before the end of the year. The great Mike McGlone, live in Miami. Bloomberg Intelligence, our senior commodities strategist. With crude oil now at a 55 handle, it's just like he told us it was going to happen. When that thing hits 40, you'll know to call Mike McGlone. News from Capitol Hill today from the Secretary of Defense. Forget the video. It's not going public. Pete Hegseth on the Hill to brief lawmakers today about the administration's overall strategy in the Caribbean, never mind the double tap strike in the waters off Venezuela. Here's what Hegseth said earlier.
In keeping with long-standing Department of War policy, Department of Defense policy, of course, we're not going to release a top secret, full unedited video of that to the general public. Hask and Sask and appropriate committees will see it, but not the general public.
Which is important because the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief himself, had said that he was fine with it going public when reporters asked him. When they followed up, I believe it was Rachel Scott at ABC, he claimed to have never said that. With us now, live from World Headquarters in New York, bringing her voice of experience to our conversation today is Jane Harman, the former Democratic Congresswoman from California, former ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee and author of Insanity Defense, Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. Jane, it's great to see you. I'm sorry you're not with us in person, but I'm just wondering first what you think of this decision because, well, the president had already said it would be made public, didn't he?
Well, first of all, Joe, next time in person, I promise. As for this, well, today it won't be made public. Tomorrow, maybe it'll be made public. It'll consume a lot of attention, which should be paid on a lot of other things. First of all, we're doing those boat strikes again, and I'm with Laura Loomer. I think they're unimportant in terms of achieving the objection the president had or said he had, which is to stop fentanyl coming into the United States. They have nothing to do with that. But I think that now that we may have a healthcare strategy, I still think we need a national security strategy that is meaningful, especially a rise of ISIS strategy. Because while all this is going on, to remind, ISIS killed a few of our soldiers in Syria, and the president is vowing revenge. I hope he is going to be talked off the cliff because bombing or doing some kind of action in Syria will undermine the regime we're trying to support and will probably promote ISIS rather than hurt ISIS. So ISIS is elsewhere. ISIS is in Australia. Maybe ISIS is in the United States. And we need a much better strategy worldwide against the rise of radical Islamic groups.
It's really interesting you take the conversation there after what we did see in Australia, knowing that they had apparently been radicalized, at least the thought is, in the Philippines. Jane Harman, I had that same thought. The president had a lot to be upset about last weekend with 2 mass shootings. He was upset about the Reiner killings. He's upset about a lot of things. So one place to take that out would be in Syria. He has promised a heavy damage and a concerted response. Where would he target in response to ISIS?
Well, I don't know, but I'm sure we have good intel on where ISIS is organizing in Syria. We should have had a lot better intel on the fact that
And you don't think we should strike?
No, I don't think we should attack I think we should have a counter-ISIS strategy, which includes Syria. Of course I do. But I think attacking the country we are hoping has changed its ways. Remember, the new president of Syria was formerly a terrorist himself. And President Trump stepped up, to his credit, I think, and recognized him and his new country. He was in New York being lauded during the UN General Assembly, and he's trying to put a fragile government together. It ain't perfect, but certainly bombing his country while he is trying to right-size his country makes absolutely no sense. And it points out that we really don't have an effective strategy. This new NSS, I think, is extremely polemic and ineffective. And oh, by the way, we've also just announced, according to the Washington Post, a unified command structure. I think this means taking the power away from the heads of European Command, Central Command, which has jurisdiction over Syria, and others. Very experienced 4-stars will now lose some traction to some central thing at the Pentagon, which, according to everything I read, has decimated its top leadership, and we're making mistakes there. And it's amateur hour, and unfortunately, we need our best brains and best experienced military and civilians on problems like the rise of ISIS.
Well, that reorg is a big story that you referred to. And, all the while, the president says he's planning land strikes in Venezuela. Jane Harman, a new phase that will include additional seizures of oil tankers and land strikes, potentially targeting drug labs somewhere deep in the jungle of Venezuela. What would be the international reaction to such a move? I
don't think that would play well internationally. I think there would be a claim of declaring war. Again, back to Laura Loomer, whom I seldom agree with. She says 8% of the drug trade coming to the U.S. has anything to do with Venezuela, and it's not it's not fentanyl, and that's what Trump has said we wanted to do. Of course, we haven't said we're for regime change. In fact, his foreign policy strategy is for strategy, which is for sovereignty, which seems to me not for regime change. But why else would we be in Venezuela at this point? So I think there's a little chaos going on, and for my 2 cents, let me say it again. The rise of terrorism should concern us much more than it does, and our focus should be worldwide on finding ways, using our best talent to combat it.
It's been historically wise to listen to Jane Harman when she points you to a point of concern more than once in an interview. Jane, I've got about a minute left. President Trump says he's delivering a national address tomorrow night. This just happened on social media, live from the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern. Does an announcement like that make you nervous?
No, I would like the president to offer leadership and explain to the American people what he's doing. I hope he stays focused on whatever the topic is. I'm imagining the topic is health care and the need to find, again, some resolution there. The Republican suggestions are sounding more sensible now, but an ACA extension seems to me the easiest thing we could do. The ACA ain't perfect, but if something doesn't happen in the next 4 days, a whole bunch of Americans, many of whom voted for this president in the last election, are going to be miserable, and that's going to play out in the 2026 elections, and I don't think that's going to be a good look for him.
The former Democratic Congresswoman from California, top Democrat on the House Intel Committee. That's Jane Harman. There's only one. Jane, thank you so much. We'll see you back here in the nation's capital, and I'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power, only here on Bloomberg.